Measuring the crank right now. Got a little bit of an issue. I hope this isn't blurred. I don't know if you can see that or not. That's what 2240. 2239. I have a thou taper on this crank, just on this pin, just on this journal, not the rest. So this is something that I need to work out when I shave the bearings. First issue. On to a few more issues with the block. As in with the rods, I found porosity. I got some right there. And they didn't even bother cleaning the chips out of it. I also have an issue. They painted the bearing for the cam. I've got to clean that up. And another issue, which I'm going to resolve when I fix the squareness or the out around this problem with the bore. I don't know if you can see that or not. That is not crosshatch at all. That's just somebody running a stone in there in a circle. Unbelievable. Well, let me get to setting this crank and sizing it. I hope it doesn't give me as much problems as the rods did, but we all know how this project is going. Next issue. I just sat the crank in here, and without the caps on it, it's pretty hard to turn. So I got my dial indicator on here to check the thrust on the thrust clearances on the thrust bearing. You can see there's a small gap right here. In here, I have the crank in the forward position. I can get a 5 thousandths feeler gauge in this, about a 1/4 inch, and it sticks solid. So what's going on here is either, no, it's got to be the bearing, because as I rotate it, that gap stays the same. If it was the crank being machined wrong, that gap would open and close. So I'm going to have to scrape a little off the bottom of this thrust bearing so I can get the crank to turn properly. And another thing that I've noticed is this may or may not be a problem. We've got Babbitt on this side of the thrust bearing, copper on that side. Now, in principle, I think a lot of the thrust is going to be forward thrust, just because the crankshaft or the clutch operation. So this may be by design. I don't know. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. But I got to get in there and do a little scraping on the bearing in the block so I can get the crank to rotate properly, just as in the rest state. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Yep, you can tell it was tight. It actually shaved some material off when I put the crank in. I don't know if you can see it. Those darker spots right here is where the crank's hitting. There's another one here. Not so bad here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly scrape that thrust. Since I've got zero play, end play, it's not going to hurt to get a thou off of there or 2 thou off of there. I'm going to shoot for a thou. If I can get this rotating halfway decent, then I'll move on to the next step. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use bluing on the mains to help expedite the scraping process. Well, let's see how it turns after I get this thrust bearing set. Oh, found a problem. The crank's not machined correctly. There's a lip right there before the fillet. It's causing the bearing to bind. This is a cap, just it's holding itself up. Ugh. Got two ways to attack this. Put the crank in the lathe, clean the fillet up, or scrape the babbitt. And this is about 10th thou out. You can see the ring all the way around it. Class act machine shop right there, man. I've decided, since the machining imperfection is on the front side, they left me some babbitt material on there, I am going to bring out the bluing, and I'm going to blue the journal thrust side, and I actually am going to blue all the journals so that when I go to fit this in here, I can look for high spots in the babbitt. I've decided to go that route. But the first thing I need to do is blue this, transfer the bluing to the babbitt, and then remove that material to where I can get the crank to spin freely. I don't even want to tell you what I paid this machine shop. Well, I got the bluing on the crank. The goal is not to get it all over me. Come on, baby. There we go. Okay, let's see how these bearings hold out, how they look. It's not as bad as it looked, because there's also a radius on the bearing, so it's only catching about 1 millimeter of that bearing there. It's catching more on this side, and then you can see where the high spots are in the babbitt that are eventually going to need to be scraped down. First thing I'm attacking is the thrust. Let me get that straightened out. Then I'll start working on scraping the high spots off of these bearings. I'm only going to scrape where the blue is, and then I'll reset it again. And eventually, after hours and hours of this, when I set that bearing in there, you'll see blue over the entire surface, and that way I'll know I don't have high spots. Full brakes applied. I asked them what they torqued this to when they, quote, sized it. They said 80 foot-pounds. Can you see it? Can you see it? It's hourglass shape. The bolt has yielded. So I'm done until I get new bolts. So I got to get on the internet and start ordering. Just what I wanted to do. That's going to be a few $100.